All right, so welcome everyone. I am Amanda Singer. I'm a professional family mediator with San Diego Family Mediation Center, and I have Heather Steer here with me with Divorce Transitions.
Got it. Transition mentors.
Thank you. My bad. Divorce Transition Mentors. And, we're talking to, do this webinar today to talk a little bit about, what's going on the side for co-parenting, finances, and just other things as they relate to divorce or co-parenting during this time. I will kind of letting people in as they still get here. But just a few housekeeping things. If everybody knows, at the bottom of your screen, there's a place where you can click on chat. So if you have any questions throughout the time, you can click on the chat and you can either send a question so that everybody can read it, or you can send it just directly to me as the host, and then we'll ask the question. So if you do prefer to have it be anonymous, you can just send it directly to me, and we'll make sure that we answer the question and, make sure we touch on everything that is of interest to people. And if you have got more people I'm admitting in, hold on. All right. Yeah, so any questions, feel free to put those in the chat box and we'll answer throughout, or topics that you want us to make sure that we touch on.
And there's also a way to change your name if you want. This is a great platform for anonymity if you want it. We always find a mix of people doing that. So if you go over your particular box to the little 3 dots and click it down, you can rename yourself. So those are just ways if there is some concern that you have. So
yes, that is
welcome
great.
everyone. We're really happy to be able to provide hopefully some good ideas and some survival techniques and some tools and resources to kind of get through this more challenging time than even, co-parenting in the best of circumstances is challenging. And under these circumstances, it can really highlight some bigger differences.
Yes, definitely. Might give another minute. I still have some people I've been admitting in, so might give another minute and then we'll get started.
Perfect.
We are recording this just so that if anybody doesn't get a chance to stay the whole time or has any, or wasn't able to be here, it'll be available to watch afterwards as well. So again, hi everyone, I'm Amanda Singer. I am one of the owners of San Diego Family Mediation Center and a professional family mediator, attorney, and a certified divorce financial analyst. And Heather, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Heather Steer. I have a practice called Divorce Transition Mentors, and I support people before, during, and after the divorce process. I'm a CPA, a certified divorce financial analyst, and a certified divorce coach. So I spend a lot of time helping people through the emotional and financial decision-making processes because they tend to be very wrapped up through the process of divorce.
Yeah. And we found that there are a lot of questions, right? And a lot of just, for everything and everyone right now, there's a lot of unknown, but especially when it comes to if you're going through a divorce or if you're already divorced and you're co-parenting with your ex, what to do right now and kind of what that looks like. And so, kind of the 2 main areas that we want to focus on are, first off, the co-parenting. What does that look like right now? We've had a lot of questions on visitation, on, how you do things, and Heather's going to share a little bit in her experience too about her co-parenting right now. And then also talk on the financial side of things. So things like, any support orders, there's been questions around that. If there has been somebody who might have lost their job or just additional expenses going on at this time with kids at home and all of that. And then we'll just, take any other questions and stuff like that. So I'm going to start just a little bit on kind of the legal side of things right now. So as some of you may know, the courts closed about mid-March, and we just got notice yesterday that their plan at this point is to remain closed through April 30th. So what that means is if anybody has had a hearing scheduled, had a status conference scheduled, anything that was scheduled, they are going to be automatically rescheduling those. However, at this point, because dates keep changing as to when they're opening, they haven't done those yet. So the courts being closed at this point means the only thing that they are taking, the only things that they're doing are DVTROs, so domestic violence temporary restraining orders. So if there is an issue that you have with a domestic violence restraining order that's needed, please know that those still are being taken care of, and the courts will make sure that those are done. But nothing else is being heard. And, a lot of the questions we've gotten are, feeling, and understandably, that you may have an issue that's an emergency or urgent, right? And, in the past, you could go in for what's called an ex parte hearing or an emergency hearing, and a judge would make an order on that. But at this time, they're not even doing any of those. So, the courts are basically shut down. We're not sure how much they're doing in terms of if they're even processing any of the paperwork they have now. So we do imagine that there'll be some delays once they reopen as to new filings and things like that. But a lot of it is going to be kind of a wait and see. And so, the question there we kind of get is, well, if the courts are closed, what do we do at this point? And, really, the options at this time would be, if you have a good relationship with, if it's an issue with a co-parent and you guys are able to have those discussions and you want to modify something, and we'll talk a little bit more about what maybe that could look like, you can do that. You can always modify that together. That being said, we understand that a lot of times that conversation isn't easy to have on your own. And so, we work as mediators, and all mediators at this point I know are doing work online. So being able to meet with a mediator at this time where you wanted to modify something, that's still an option. So mediation is always an option. If you have an attorney, talking with your attorney about, using a mediator or finding a way to negotiate. Just because the courts are closed, it doesn't mean that things can't happen. It just means they can't happen through the court system right now. So to touch a little bit on kind of the co-parenting side of things, and the main questions that we've gotten so far. So what I've gotten a lot from people is, well, if, what do we do? Do we change our visitation schedule? What do we do in that situation? So first and foremost, any court order that you do have at this point remains in effect. So the shelter in place order, the stay at home order, whatever you want to call it, does allow travel if you're complying with a court order. So if you have a parenting plan with your ex, or even if you have a parenting plan with someone you're still married with, or never was, you can comply with that court order and you can still do exchanges back and forth. That being said, you may want to modify what that looks like, and I'll let Heather talk about that in a little bit. But that's the first thing to remember, is that if you have a court order, you do need to continue complying with that unless you guys can agree on something different. And so, with that, what we found is, the questions around what do you do if you have a co-parent who either is exposed to the virus in their job or anything they're doing, or a co-parent who maybe isn't taking the stay-at-home seriously, and you have concerns that they may be around other people who might be putting them and you and then your kids at risk, as well as what do you do if you have an at-risk child health-wise, or potentially you or your co-parent is also at risk, how to deal with those. So we'll break those down a little bit. They're all a little different, but the crux of the first part of it being continue to follow your court order. That being said, going into, we always look at what's going to be in the best interest of the kids, and part of that is the health and safety, right? So if you do have a co-parent that is being exposed, that may need to be in a discussion that the two of you have about what is this going to look like? How are we going to do that? So Heather, I'll let you talk a little bit about maybe some options with that, and I'll take a look through some of the questions while you're speaking as well.
Okay. Yeah, I've been glancing at them, so I'll try and hit on a few of them that I'm seeing. I always say when I'm doing different presentations and talking to people and my own clients, love your children more than you hate your spouse or your ex-spouse. So to the extent that you guys can have conversations and use language around the concept that this is for the best, for the best interest of the children, it's very important. So I have 2 kids. I have 50-50 custody. I have an ex-husband who works in the healthcare field, and as well as his live-in girlfriend. And they have aides that come in and out of the house for a special needs child. So we've had a very, very honest conversation about what that looks like at his house, because we've been doing much more strict, no social interaction at my house. But it can be considered detrimental to the kids to isolate them from the other parent. So I've really been thinking about some creative ideas and going to a 1 week on, 1 week off schedule, where it's a longer duration of time that you're trading off. And so there's less transition periods during this. You can kind of establish a better longer term routine, because school tended to do that for most of us. Or do the Monday through Friday with one parent, have the weekends with the other parent, so that you're the one establishing the school routine. It's very difficult when there's, like both of us are working, so it's, gets a little bit more chaotic. But I had a client that is they're trading days. So the kids right now are 100% with her, and the trade-off will be that he'll get more time in the summer. So while this is going through, and then he gets to FaceTime with them and all of that. There is a financial discussion a little bit around that in the short term, because it is more expensive when you have the kids full time, and you have all the food costs, and while we don't have as many activities, there's still a real kind of implication to the household. So if you can have that conversation in a reasonable way, just to say, can we offset some of that? That would be wonderful, especially if you don't have access to school lunch programs and other things that end up being a little bit cheaper for food. One couple moved back in together. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. That wouldn't have worked for me. But I mean, for some people, if you can, I see some people laughing out there on video. That's an idea. I liked the idea, particularly if the other household is in an at-risk exposure situation. Or, by the way, if one of the people gets sick, we had to sit down and have that conversation. Like, what does that look like if he gets sick or I get sick? So, we've made an arrangement and some contingency plans. And it's really important, because that's going to be really scary when one parent gets it and then you're like, whoa, we're now kind of all exposed, because we have been, going back and forth. And who can take care of who at that point. So, I would really encourage everyone to rise above, and it is so difficult in the middle of a divorce, or, just you always get triggered by your spouse, and especially when there are poor behaviors involved, like they just are like still partying, still having lots of people around their house, still, that's, and you don't want that. You're holding yourself to a higher standard. If you can try to have those conversations with your spouse and use, the language of, we need to love the community, really. It's even beyond just our children and ourselves at this point. It's, it's the community at large, to make the most responsible decisions we can in, a not optimal set of circumstances.
And Heather, I've got some questions about, what if you're not, if there is zero communication between you and the other parent? One of the conversations, I've been having with some of the people is, I don't know how many of you have heard the term of parallel parenting, right? The idea that you might not actually be co-parenting, but parallel parenting is, kids are at your place, kids are at your co-parent's place, and you each do your parenting when they're with each of you. The issue is at this point, parallel parenting kind of has to go out the window. Unfortunately, There has to be some communication, right? And what I would say with that is there are many ways to communicate. So it doesn't have to be phone. It doesn't have to be on your own. There are a lot of great co-parenting apps. We've got some listed on our website, but we can also include, some of those on our Facebook page and places so you can find, but there are some great co-parenting apps. So you don't have to be communicating just directly with them. It also keeps a record, which is nice in those apps. So if you do have a high conflict relationship and you want to have, record of what has been discussed, that can be a good thing to do. But the other thing is, if you guys can't have that conversation, looking at having a third party. Now that could be anyone, right? So it doesn't have to be a paid mediator. It really could be, is there anybody that is someone in your life who you both respect that could sit down with the two of you and help you have that conversation? Just thinking about who that person might be, but there, it's just the idea that there really has to be communication at this time somehow. So a couple of the other questions I saw is about out-of-state travel. So I don't know if this might apply to more than one person. I had a call earlier this week about this, but if you've got a co-parent that's out of state and maybe the kids go back and forth, I know that that's definitely a bigger concern at this time. Now, travel is still happening as far as I know, right? It's not, shut down in that sense, but, the conversation I had with this person was, okay, have a conversation about, is it safe to have the kids on a plane? And is it safe to be going back and forth? And, how you guys feel about that? And then just like Heather talked about, can you arrange an alternative? Right? So if they're supposed to have a week, and I know that probably a lot of travel right now because it's spring break time, right? And so if you've got an out-of-state co-parent, this might be a time where you trade the kids back and forth. If they're going to miss a week now, can you, like Heather said, tack that on during the summer? Could you provide extra time then? Something like that. And also figuring out ways that you are staying in touch, just like Heather said, can you FaceTime? Can you Skype? What ways can they still be involved? Even if they're not able to see them for the full week.
Yeah, and this is and again, a time and an opportunity potentially in some people's situations for some healing in this process and to come together and have conversations when previously you were running more parallel, that to come, to sort of dial that back and maybe there can be some kind of healing and better actions going forward. I always try to send that energy out. That's the energy vibration of being positive tends to attract back positive. So if you can avoid the like high conflict language, like things like, you always do that. Well, did they always leave the dishes in the sink every morning? Probably not always, but a lot of the times, or forget to do the toothpaste cap. It's, there may not always be misbehaving parents, but, sometimes they do, and that concerns you. So if you can talk about more of the sometimes language rather than kind of the attacking language in those conversations, that's also very helpful.
A question that I see has kind of come up from a few people is about play dates. So, in different ways, but, kind of the question of either having play dates yourself or your co-parents are still having play dates. So, I'm going to sound like a broken record in some ways because communication is really what's key. But what I think is important oftentimes is how you do that communication. And so that goes also to what Heather was just talking about, right? About how your words that you're using is that, if you're going to if you come at your co-parent in a way that is blaming them for what they're doing or, telling them that they're doing things wrong, even if they are, you're not going to get a response from them where, they're most likely not going to respond very positively, right, they're going to get defensive and feel that they have to, sometimes they argue just to argue, right? We all have experienced that. And so, with play dates, especially, I think that it's, sometimes it's talking about what that looks like, right? Because I think that with all of this going on, it's the idea of, well, they're only seeing one person. Well, but who is that one person seeing? And then, if they're having play dates with your kid, they may also be having play dates with other kids. So now, having that discussion of who you're opening them up to being exposed to, they may not have realized that, right? They may be thinking it more as, well, like they want to see friends and what that looks like. So I think definitely having a conversation about what does play dates look like, having an agreement, are you going, what are you going to do in those situations? And, doing, ultimately always putting the kids first.
Yep.
Couple other, I'm just looking at the kind of co-parenting stuff, and then we'll switch over. I know there's some financial questions, and that was something, to talk about as well. Just making sure so somebody asked about the good co-parenting apps. There's a lot of them. Our Family Wizard has been around forever. There's Co-Parenter. There is, I'm blanking, right? Heather, can you think of any other
Isn't it Co-Parently, I think is one.
Yeah. Fair. Yeah. Well, Talking Parents. Somebody just said, yep, that's another one. I think Fair, F-A-Y-R might be one, if I'm remembering correctly. But they're listed on our website under resources. So, that might be a good place to look.
And for calendaring, like Cozy is really popular, and you can do a lot of other communication through that one. That's one that I use.
Yeah.
And
yeah, so I think that, kind of looking through some of the questions, I mean, I don't know if you guys are having communication with your co-parents and it's not going well, or you're not having any, but I think that, what I've seen a lot is, the anxiety is at a high level, right? Stress is high, and it's just hard to have those conversations and hard to do that. And so, again, I just recommend, if you have somebody, to help you with those, that it's okay, that, it can really save a lot of arguing, and it can save a lot of high emotions if you guys are able to get some things, whether it's in writing, whether it's just agreed upon between the two of you, anything like that.
Yeah, and I think another thing to recognize, particularly for those of you in the divorce process, is, you were already going through a major transition in life, and a grief cycle, and a process that in some other events that I do, I go into at a pretty deep level. But how you're showing up on a day-to-day basis can be very inconsistent because of where you're at on that transition curve. And I always, people talk about the 5 stages of grief and how it's like this linear process, like, oh, I got through that gate and that gate and that gate. Well, it's totally not that. Like, we all know now that the way they present is much more of like a wash cycle. Like you might be here down at the bottom today, and then you kind of get back up and start climbing out, but then something happens and you crash back in the cycle and kind of have to dig your way out. And recognize that your spouse, your ex, is going through the same thing that you are. And where you guys are showing up on a day-to-day basis can be wildly different. Particularly, we're layering this on top of potential job losses, just fear, anxiety, the impact of social isolation that happens to people, and the behavior, changes that people experience through that. So, I would encourage all of you to, to understand when you are approaching, particularly in a higher conflict situation or a more triggering type of moment, where that person is at versus where you're at in that moment. Because you're probably going to be approaching them when you have when you're in a little bit more of a strength position, or feeling like you're in that part of your energy. And then they could be like, oh my God, I'm like facing layoffs, or I have no idea. Like, so if you can preface the conversation with, you know, hey, I think this is something that's important for us to talk about. Can we make some space and some time to have these honest conversations? And like, my ex and I don't really ever talk about what goes on in our individual households. Like, I figure if something crazy is going on, my kids are old enough, they would report back to me. So, and I don't think it's good for my kids to be spying on each other. So we do share a nanny though now. So I'm like, I have nothing to hide in my house, but, it's just important. Like, we still have, you know, we don't share a lot of information with each other. And now we've really had to come together and be really honest about what's going on, and hold ourselves accountable, and at a higher standard, you know, a standard that we agree to hopefully keep, you know, ourselves and the community as safe as we can while we have, you know, while we're still transitioning our kids back and forth. So we have a little bit of a higher bar we have to stand to, because we can't keep our kids in one house. Or in my situation, that wasn't going to get agreed to.
And I think, Heather, I'm seeing that with a lot of the comments, right? And that it seems, you know, most people, there might be some where they're staying at one house, but that a lot of people are still, you know, kids are going back and forth. And that's also, you know, keeping in mind that it is good for the kids to be seeing both of their parents, as long as it can be done safely, right? You know, I think, you know, kind of one of the questions about how do you get someone to agree to a third party if they're not interested in anyone else's opinions, right? I mean, I hear that often, and I think that, again, as much as you can focus on the kid or kids, to be able to, you know, this isn't about just you wanting to have a conversation, right? This is figuring out what you guys are going to do for the kids, and, you know, being able to have those conversations, and just saying, you know, sometimes admitting, like, we're not able to do this on our own, right? And so how do we make this work? Whether, you know, that's with a mediator, whether that's with a third party, you know, that's a friend or a family member, somebody who can help with it. And I think, you know, as we've said, I mean, all of these are unprecedented times, right? And so, you know, acknowledging that we don't have all of the answers, and we're trying to figure out how to make this work. You know, do have some questions again about like travel. So maybe we'll touch on that just a little bit. You know, I think that, you know, just was talking about travel, potentially, you know, across border. And I think that, again, that has to, you know, a conversation of, you know, how you guys are going to do that. If this sounds like with this person that you guys have been in agreement already in how you're doing things. I mean, maybe, again, trying to find a way for the kids to still see the co-parent, whether that's on video or, you know, however you can do that so that you both still feel comfortable. There's talking about talking parents doesn't give tips. That is correct. You know, there are also some good co-parenting classes. So here in San Diego, we have Kids Turn San Diego. If anyone's heard of them before or participated in their classes. But Kids Turn, I know, is doing their classes virtually at this time. So that can be an opportunity, especially if you've got some time at home, to say, okay, well, maybe we'll do a co-parenting class. Being able to, you know, to help for the kids and for you guys.
Is that an app or a website, was a question?
So Kids Turn is online, Kids Turn SD, I believe. I will chat, I can find the website and I will chat that out to everyone. Had a question, can the parent who has full custody cancel the other parent's weekend time? So because when you say full custody, you know, it really depends on what exactly you mean by that. I mean, do you have 100% timeshare? If you do have a parenting plan, though, that gives the other parent certain weekends, the stay-at-home order does allow you to still do travel for that. So, you know, unless you guys arrange something differently, you would still need to continue with the parenting plan that you have. Heather,
there was a question about the stimulus checks way up, and this is going to be really an interesting one because they're basing these stimulus checks off of 2018 tax returns. And so, and depending on if you filed your 2019, but I would assume maybe some of you are still in the divorce process and still filing jointly even for 2019. And this is going to be something that needs to get discussed with your ex, depending on who is the primary person on the tax return. It's going to be written in both people's names, but it's going to go to that person. So if you are eligible and that's a thing, that is definitely something to keep an eye on and have a discussion that should be split. I mean,
Yeah.
I would, but I know there's going to be some battles around those checks coming up.
Yeah, that's a good. I think we had some questions kind of switching to the financial side, like you were talking about child support and whether, if that's, if you've lost your job, either you've lost your job or maybe your co-parent has lost their job, and if they are not continuing to pay child support. And this is such a tough time for everyone. And, I know that there are probably a lot, people on this call as well who have been laid off from jobs. And, it is, so, I can only imagine very difficult trying to figure out how to work that. The financial side often is even harder to have discussions with an ex than co-parenting is, right? Because, although it might not always go over exactly well, I find that most co-parents are at least willing to agree that they want what's best for their kids, right? But when it comes to money and finances, that can be a much harder conversation. And so, I think that there's, the first part being if you're the one who lost your job and you're needing to modify support, whether you're paying it or whether you're receiving it. Again, the courts aren't open at this time, but an option like coming to mediation can allow you guys to enter into a stipulation, an amendment to your original agreement that would be filed once the courts are open and would be, could do it that way. Because unfortunately, whatever the court order is, same as with your visitation, the child support stays in effect at this point. But if you can work out a different agreement and maybe come to something that's going to work for both of you, that might be something that you guys can do at this time. The other questions we're getting some on like taxes, right? So, Heather's an inactive CPA, but neither of us are currently CPAs, but I know there's some questions about, maybe trading the deduction or trading things that you might have the tax credit if you're having the kids more. I think those are really creative solutions that you could talk about with your ex, right? So if you are having the kids with you more, maybe saying, well, I am going to, but can I take them for the taxes next year? And those are things that you can put in writing as well.
Yeah, those can still be assigned. Based on agreement. So typically, Amanda, you would put those in someone's settlement agreement, right? What the agreement is for the kids as they age up and out.
Yeah. So we especially in any of our settlement agreements include who's going to take the kids as a deduction, who's going to file head of household, things like that. So I know somebody asked, that he said you could claim the kids this year and you went to file, but he had already claimed them. So I guess it depends on whether it was in a written agreement or not. If it wasn't,
the IRS will kick both returns back out.
Yeah, that's the other problem. You do want to make sure that, you're not both claiming them because they will. But if it was in your original agreement, going back to them and discussing then that, either you're going to amend your tax returns or, are they going to pay you for half of the tax credit they may have received back? So, seeing what you can do there. We talked a little bit about extra expenses. Heather, is there like kind of with the kids being potentially with you full time?
Yeah, and that's where it comes down to like a mediated setting where you can have that discussion that says, hey, I'm having the kids, a lot more, and so can you kick in for some food? I have a client that she's doing Monday through Friday the whole school day, and then they go back in the evenings on the appropriate evening days because her ex is still working. So they've agreed that he pays her some money for that, and to kind of cover almost like a nanny fee, because all the school support childcare is shut down, plus some food expenses. So there's ways to get kind of creative about that. If one of you isn't employed now, that doesn't help those of us employed still, but you know, we're getting more creative. I'm keeping my kids more because he works in an office and I can work, obviously I'm working from home. So that's definitely something to either sit with a mediator or have that conversation with him. He or she will understand that, hopefully, that there are real expenses with having your kids in your house. We all get it. That's, you know, that's how we've been living. And that's why what child support is for. But again, if you go back to more of that theory of trade days now, that in the summer he'll have them more, she'll have them more in the summer, there's a dance there as well. Like the expenses will be made up for in the long term. So.
Well, and I know there was at least a comment or two about, kind of the idea that sometimes they do get upset if you're having these money conversations, right? I think that those are sometimes very difficult to have one-on-one. And a lot of it is because, finances are a stressful conversation to have. And, especially right now when so many people, even if they do have jobs, may have income that's been cut. Businesses are, not bringing in as much money. If somebody has a job in a, restaurant or hotel, those are most likely, they're not working. It can be stressful to think about their own finances and then try to have that conversation with them as well. Let's see. So questions about, if a parent owed arrears that they aren't eligible for the stimulus check. Yes, I do think that is correct. Right? Heather, did you remember?
If they're in arrears with their taxes, you can't get the stimulus.
I think if they're in arrears for support too.
Oh, if they've got a garnishment against them.
So if they've got, so they wouldn't get it. So in terms of would you get, I think the question is, would that person still get their check even if the other parent isn't? I think that's what you're asking.
I don't actually know that, but I'd be happy to research that. That's an interesting nuance.
Yeah. And I think, like Heather kind of said before, there's going to be a lot of this kind of where are checks going. I know that if the IRS has the bank account, they're going directly into the bank account potentially even. So, that is a conversation to have, and also that the stimulus check is not just for yourself, but also for the kids, right? So if you qualify, that you're receiving $500 per kid as well.
Yeah, I wonder how I hadn't thought about the arrears part of that.
Yeah.
But good question. I'm sure that the IRS probably hasn't put guidance out on some of these more nuanced details, because divorce always throws a glitch into any time they want to change something in the code. It's when you're divorcing and then you're transitioning your divorce across multiple tax years and all of that, and then decide, you want to file married filing separately because you can't handle each other anymore. And it becomes very nuanced.
Yeah. And I think, it is, like Heather's saying, it's tough that there's just, again, kind of going back to the unknown, a lot of that still, things are developing every day and figuring out what that's going to look like, is certainly a conversation to have, but you'll always have more to talk about. And, you may not be able to previously communicate with your ex, but I think that also looking at it as, you may be able to, it's possible that co-parent relationships can improve during this time. If you are able to, do this, maybe that'll continue. Maybe it's something that you guys can have a better relationship for your kids. I have a question. Let's see. Filed 2019 taxes already. Got to claim the kid in 2018. X won't be able to get stimulus because he makes too much, so we won't get the $500 for our kid. I guess it would depend on who claimed. Is that the?
I got to so he claimed the kid 2019 and you're claiming you get 2018. Yeah. You alternate years. Okay. So, and you filed your 2019 already without the kid. So you will not get the $500 and that will be phased out unless you guys wanted to go back and modify your tax returns for that.
And it also, I mean, it did set out the filing date. So if you haven't filed yet, it's something you could still, but I think that one said that she had, right?
That one she's already filed.
Okay.
So they would have had to go do an agreement. I mean, we didn't know any of this was happening. So
yeah,
but that would have been a good example to get the $500 for the family.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's, you know, oftentimes we're looking at who it's most beneficial to, but the point at which they're maxing out the stimulus checks, not the same level at which the child tax credit maxes out.
Yeah.
So it is possible that you had which is kind of silly now that I'm saying that out loud.
I know. I thought of that the other day and I was like, why do they have to make us remember a whole nother set of numbers in there? But
yeah. So, because I know that oftentimes in mediation, especially, we're looking at, well, where is it most beneficial, right? Who's going to take the child or children as a deduction, as a tax credit? But it might have been a different discussion based on these numbers.
Yeah, no, that one's going to be interesting. So there's a message from Kelly. I had a child in 2019, haven't filed taxes. So you need to file your taxes. And I don't know what the cutoff is of when they're going to be determining, like if you filed your taxes, your 2019, when that stimulus check is going out either. That's kind of, because they're trying to get the stimulus checks out fast, right? So when is it that they've received someone's tax return? Like that's an open question.
And I don't think they haven't put dates on when those are going out yet, right?
No, but it's always, you know, these are going out right away. But like, you know, I don't file my taxes until October.
Yeah. Yeah. I know we had questions, and thank you, Rachel, for bringing up again of how long hearings will be pushed out or delayed for. We don't completely. And part of that is, you know, so when the San Diego courts first closed, they had been scheduled to reopen this upcoming Monday, April 6th. Now, as of like yesterday, today, they set it out till April 30th. So I think part of the issue is the unknown as to when exactly they're going to open. But I have seen, everything we've seen showed that they will be automatically rescheduled. So if you have a hearing, if you have a family resolution conference or a status, you know, what they call a status conference, those will be rescheduled for you automatically. So don't feel like you need to call the courts. I think someone had asked about that. You don't need to call the courts. You don't need to reschedule them yourselves. They will get rescheduled. That being said, it may take some time. Now, if you're represented, so if you have an attorney, those notices will go to your attorney, not to you, because they're the one on the court forms. So just be aware of that you'll want to be in touch with your attorney. They should be, of course, letting you know as well once they get rescheduled. But just so you know, if you're self-represented, they'll come directly to you. So even if you're maybe working with a mediator or something, but you're self-represented, you may, you'll get those notices directly. And somebody actually had a question at the beginning that I don't think I touched on about what exactly an FRC is. So the family resolution conferences are status conferences. Anytime you file for divorce in California, they automatically schedule one. They're a little bit different whether you have an attorney, if you're represented or you're not. But basically it's to find out where you're at in the process. So if you're not represented, and does this question kind of seem like you were doing the divorce mainly on your own, it's to find out where you're at in the process. It's not to go in front of the judge. A judge isn't making any decision on those days, but it's more just to see where you're at. If you have your final judgment and you get everything filed and done before the status conference, they take it off calendar. So they're not, sometimes they're not, you know, not necessarily attended. So question 2 about, I know we've talked a little bit of, or a lot because it's what we do about mediation. I think that one of the biggest positives right now with mediation is that if you wait until the court's open, you have nothing to do right now. Right. So if you want to try to have, reach an agreement on support issues or reach an agreement on a new schedule, you can't file a request for order right now. You can't do anything in the court system. And so mediation is really a great option right now to speed up that process, right? To get something in place. And I think, again, a lot of the anxiety and stress is around the unknown. And so it may help to have an agreement and figure some things out. And that could be just on parenting, that could be on support, that could also be if you're in the divorce process or if you were thinking about the divorce process. A lot of times, it can be a lot to deal with, so you don't have to do all of it, but sometimes just getting some things agreed to and written down can help with those concerns and the unknown.
Yeah, I think mediation, sorry, my light died. Mediation is really the best thing in this type of situation. It's totally fit for still moving forward. I've been in several mediations, and we can do it on a format like this, like Zoom, and having discussions about what we're doing about certain assets and whether or co-parenting plans or all of that stuff. Amanda can do very easily in this type of setting. Yeah. So it's really been working. I was actually supposed to be in LA Monday and did this for 4 hours, and we had separate conference rooms. It was a high conflict situation. And so we were in separate Zoom rooms even, and the mediator just went in between the 2 rooms. So there's lots of creative ways. I'm a huge believer in mediation. And so if there are items that you think that you can work through, I would highly encourage you to reach out to San Diego Family Mediation Center for sure.
Thanks. And, I think that, like Heather said, yeah, we're mediation is working much better online than I think anyone may have even thought it could, right? I mean, we've always offered it and we've done it with some clients. But I think the concern from clients and other people was, would this work? And one of the things is that you're not even having to be in the same room with them. Right. So being able, sometimes that's not wanting to sit down at a table together. Well, the online option allows you guys to mediate, but not even have to be together. Let's see, one question.
There was a question back on if I filed taxes, claimed both kids. We separated, not married, and she didn't work so our plan was to split the kids next year so she can claim one of them. Mm-hmm. But I would look at the stimulus as separate from the child tax credit that you also got the benefit of by filing with both kids. So you got that benefit. And I would encourage you to split the stimulus across both households. It's probably a negotiable point, but I don't think it really ties to who, depending on maybe what your custody schedule is. If you're 50-50, I would split that 50-50. The idea is to sort of bolster both households in that situation. But that's definitely something you will have to talk to with your spouse. If I was advocating for your spouse, I would say she should get, or I don't know if this is a man or a woman, but the other spouse should get half if you're 50-50 custody for that piece.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Fair way.
Well, and sometimes what we find is, you could say that to your spouse and they're going to respond very differently to you saying it than to having a conversation with a third party. Yeah. That's a lot of what it is. I have a few questions on mediation of, can just one spouse do mediation? No. So for mediation, it is voluntary. So both parties do have to be willing to do it. That being said, it can be done with attorneys. It can be done without attorneys. It can be, in a number of different ways. So, oftentimes it's just finding, why does the other person refuse to do mediation? And can you kind of, talk about what some of those benefits are? And happy to talk with you more about that for, who had asked that question. Also questions about kind of if you were in the middle of mediation and, your spouse has changed their mind on everything, should you get a lawyer? I mean, it really depends on your specific situation. I mean, right now it's tough, again, in that you're not going to get anywhere differently in the courts. That being said, having sometimes a consulting attorney or maybe continuing to do mediation, even if you both were represented, could be an option as well, so that that could maybe help the process move along. Oftentimes it's figuring out kind of, why they've changed their mind, why they're being unreasonable, and what can we do to move that along. Had a question on a financial question that we hadn't really talked about yet, but I think is a good one about, thoughts or guidance on things like retirement equalizing payments. So if you are currently in the middle of a divorce or, negotiating or had done it recently, you might have been equalizing retirement accounts. And, the question with that is the markets are down, right? And so if dollar amounts are attached to those retirement accounts, they might be worth 20 to 30% less than they were weeks ago, potentially more. Heather's shaking her head like.
I mean, when I look at my clients, I encourage them to do percentages and not dollar amounts for that exact reason. I've seen so many cases go sideways when it comes time to split something and the money's gone, like when we've had crashes and ups and downs. Luckily, over the last several years, it's been going up, but right now that's a very real discussion in some of my cases of when we're trying to, push the deck chairs around.
Yeah. Well, and I would say too, it kind of depends on where you're at in the process right now, right? So if you're at a point where you had come up with an amount, but maybe you're not final yet, well, then maybe it needs to be revisited, right? Or if you do have an agreement, if it's an amount, does that include gains or losses, right? So that's often one of the things where if it is an exact amount that should be written in as well would be the gains or losses. So it's taking that into account as well. So it really depends on where you're at in the process, but understanding too that, all the accounts are probably down, right? And so, having that discussion and looking at it so that it doesn't turn out that you end up having to give more than you actually had in your account or what that half was. I'm reading a couple of private questions. So got a situation where somebody has an attorney and somebody doesn't. Oftentimes, depending on who that attorney is, I would even say maybe reaching out to their attorney as opposed to them could be a way to negotiate. So if you're not represented, you can reach out directly to their attorney and they can communicate directly with you as long as you're not represented. If you're having, at this point, they're not helping financially and kind of cut off from the finances, use this time to see if the financial disclosures are being done, right? So get your preliminary declarations of disclosure together and, kind of understand what needs to happen to keep the process moving even while we're out of court. And whether that's on your own or with the mediator, or if they have an attorney and you kind of negotiate that way too. Question about how affordable is mediation. I mean, mediation is always going to be a more cost-effective option than litigation. I think that, it really depends. Every mediator is going to be different. We do some flat fees and some hourly work. But it can be if you just need an hour of time with your co-parent or with your spouse to work out some issues over Zoom, then that's a possibility. So mediation is going to be much more affordable. I think that most hourly mediators are somewhere. I mean, it depends on their hourly rate, probably somewhere between $300 and $450 in San Diego. Heather, do you think that's?
Yep, that's fair.
Our hourly rates are $350, so we're kind of in the middle there. But that being said, I think that especially at this time, there may be mediators also willing to work with you. If it's a financial issue, there may be ways to kind of still get some help at this time.
There's a lot of divorce homework. If you're in the middle of your divorce process, to Amanda's point, there is a lot to pull together with your PDODs, your declarations and financial disclosures and that kind of work that you could be doing when you have a little bit of downtime. It's not fun work, I won't lie to you, but it's necessary, and this could be a good time to start doing that.
Yeah. And if you do need help with it, that's actually one of the things I'm going to plug Heather's expertise is that, you know, she really does a great job helping clients get those together, because it can be daunting. It can be really tough to find all that information. And so, you know that you don't have to do it on your own.
Yeah.
I know we talked a little bit about rescheduling of hearings, but I do also have gotten some questions about, okay, well, what happens if maybe your judgment's at the court, right? Or if you've signed your final judgment, you know, in California, we've got that 6-month waiting period. So if you were in the process of a divorce, the earliest the divorce can be final is 6 months from when the other party was served. That may be delayed at this point. We don't know. It just depends on how long it takes the court to reopen, right? So I'm telling all of my clients, you know, anything that I have signed paperwork right now, I will submit as soon as the court's open, but I just don't know exactly when that's going to be. So it certainly could be that the 6 months get pushed out farther than you may have originally anticipated. But, you know, that's something that, you know, we, at least for clients, are keeping an eye on as to, as soon as the court's open, being able to get those back. So I know we are coming up on an hour here. We can take a few more questions if anybody has any. I've tried my best to get through the questions that we've received, but I'm sure that we have missed some. So if there was something that you asked that wasn't answered, you know, please feel free to copy and paste that to me. Or, you know, if you have any additional questions, just before, because I know some people may hop off and need to go at the hour, we are going to be doing a webinar every week, at least for the rest of the month, on different topics. So we'll be sending those out by email. So if you're not on our newsletter already, you can go onto our website and sign up to receive our newsletter, or we'll be posting them on Facebook for the events as well. And just like today, we'll record the events so that they're available after the fact if anyone has questions, or sorry, wasn't able to see it but still had questions. So, you know, we just, you know, hopefully want to provide as much information as we can during this time. And so if there's any specific topics too that you guys would like to hear about, let us know. We're going to be kind of rotating who does these with us and things like that. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in right now. Heather, do you have anything?
No, I think, you know, just try and keep as positive as possible out there. And, you know, because I do believe in the, no matter what religion you are, there's a lot of kind of what you do unto your neighbors is done unto you type of messaging, karma, and just sending out positive, you know, energy is really important, particularly at a time like this where we all need to be uplifted more than usual.
Yeah, no, I think it's very true. And I know that I've been thinking, you know, I've been looking at, as there's been a lot of talk about looking at what I am grateful for. And, you know, I know that it can be tough sometimes to think about the gratitude and think about the things that are good when there is so much going on. You know, but if I love the conversation that Heather had about how you rephrase things, because I've done that in this time too, because, you know, if looking at the fact that, you know, grateful to be able to work from home, right? I think there are a lot of people who talk about, oh, you know, it's very difficult with kids there and everything that's going on and being at home. But the fact that there are a lot of people who can't work from home, you know, I am very grateful for that. So I think that, you know, looking at the gratitude that we have. So thank you all. Really appreciate you all for joining us. And like I said, we'll have more webinars going forward, and, you know, hope to provide information that's helpful for you guys at this time.
Yeah, and you can take a look at both of our websites for other events that we participate in. This one was hosted by Amanda's company, and we also belong to a great vetted divorce professional organization called Vesta that's got a lot of great webinars going on right now as well. So if you know of other people in similar situations, take a look at the content that's out there. There's some good community building things happening, particularly in the Southern California area. Some of you might not even be from California. So
yeah, Yeah, exactly. And I know at least myself, I can stay on a little bit longer. I don't know if Heather, I think you can
Yeah.
too. So I know there's a couple questions coming in, so we'll keep answering them. We've got a little bit of more time. I do need to read a long question though first. So give me 1 second. So question about like guideline, like having agreed to a child support amount that's more than guideline, even when it's 50-50. So I can't tell exactly from this whether you have a written agreement already, because then in that case, the order would stay as it is at this point, because this is saying that you guys agreed for the payments to be done weekly, but now she's wanting the money up front instead. So, you know, I would say if you do have the court order again, you know, whatever you have in that order needs to stay. But if you guys, you know, need to modify it, you can also modify that certainly. Let's see. Oh, questions on the video. So our moderators got that already. Thank you. All right. I think that's all we've got on questions. I know you guys are thanking us, but I'd also, you know, thank you all for being here and, you know, just taking the time to also figure out how do you deal with all these issues. It's not easy. We get that.
Yep. Raising the level of our quality community by getting educated and figuring out how to be creative is fantastic.
All right, I've got, I guess, one last question maybe.
This is a tax. So are you filing, is your intention then to file married filing separately? Would be my question on that, because you're still married. And that does have a financial small detriment rather than if you could file jointly. That's to that last question.
Yeah. So say I'm not sure. And on some of the tax questions that you guys have, sounds like maybe one of our future webinars should be more tax related. So, you know, we certainly, even if we can't answer the questions, we've got great resources of professionals that can. So please always feel free to reach out to us and we can, you know, make sure that we get that, you know, get those professionals connected with you. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all. I think we're going to end for today, and you know, we'll send out information about next week's webinar.
Yeah. Stay healthy, everyone.
Yes. Stay safe and healthy, and we'll talk again soon. Thanks.